One of the things we could all agree on about beauty is that nobody agrees on what beauty means. There's been an undeniable communication breakdown regarding the concept of beauty, but the good news is we could actually easily fix this, because there's only three ways that people have looked at beauty in the past, and there's only three ways that people look at beauty now. And so when you understand these three ways, it'll help bridge the gap that you have in the communication with people who hold differing worldviews, and it'll give you a greater sense of clarity on your own position and your own worldview. And you might actually change your mind. You might solidify and go deeper and double down on your worldview, but at least you understand exactly how to articulate where it is that you're coming from and be able to understand where other people are coming from. Now, obviously, if people are hell-bent on destruction and chaos and they just want to argue and tear you down, you're not going to be able to communicate with those people. But for the people who actually want genuine dialogue, this is the video that you need to watch to help explain what exactly beauty is according to these three different worldviews. So here is the three ways to understand beauty. Way number one. The first way is classical understanding of beauty, also known as the pre-modern way. Then you have a modern way of beauty. This is slowly reacting to the classical way of beauty as we enter into the modern world, usually starting with the Renaissance but culminating in the Enlightenment. And then you have postmodern view of beauty. Once again, this is a reaction to modern view of beauty. So with these three viewpoints, you likely fall into one of these categories. So if I had to guess, I would say you fall mostly into the postmodern category, just based off of what the average person thinks about beauty today. Some people who have put a little bit more thought into this, they're probably modern. And only if you've really, really thought about it very deeply do you fall into the classical category. Now, because all of these exist simultaneously, it's highly unlikely that you're solely a postmodernist, or solely a modernist, or solely some sort of antiquarian who takes a classical worldview. You probably have a little bit of blend of all of these. But once I break down and show you what all the differing viewpoints and how they developed, it'll help you understand so much better as to where you fall. And then that will help you be able to understand and really start to get to the bottom of the question of what actually is beauty. Because maybe you haven't even heard some of these other ideas, or maybe that you've heard them, but you haven't heard them explained in a way that actually makes sense. So we'll start with the classical worldview. So the classical worldview says that beauty is transcendent. Whoops. I have spelling problems, so just bear with me here. Okay, the classical worldview says that beauty is transcendent. Basically, beauty comes from God. Beauty is linked to the divine. That's the source of beauty. You have the source of beauty is God, the source of beauty is nature, which is God's creation, and something called the ideal forms. Let me get into what each of these actually mean. But so, what does that mean to be transcendent for the classical beauty? This means it's beyond us. It's for the classical worldview, and by classical I mean most of the case up till the Renaissance. We can't really get into the prehistorical view because we don't have any historical record of what those people thought. But this is basically the majority of world history, and the majority of humans who have ever existed have had this view of beauty. So what does beauty mean? Beauty is forever beyond us. We could never attain it, but it's something that we could point to and we could continually move towards, just like God. So this is solidified actually with people like Pythagoras and people like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and then even some of the church fathers. I believe Thomas Aquinas was one of the people who talked a lot about the transcendentals. And the transcendentals are just principles of reality that are identified with divinity. So for the classical worldview, you have beauty is identified with the good and the truth. We'll write beauty here too, just to show that these three go together. So these are the three transcendentals right here: goodness, truth, and beauty. And they would say that these all are things that guide you towards the divine and guides you towards the ultimate. They would say that these three they're intertwined together and they're all continually working together. If something is good, that means it's true and that means it's beautiful. And if something is beautiful, that means it's true and that means it's good. And you have the counterparts to each of these in this classical worldview. So basically you have evil. What in the world am I doing here? Okay, you have evil. This is the counterpart to good. And then you have lies, which is the counterpart to truth. And you have ugliness. And ugliness is the counterpart to beauty. Now these things are the ideal forms, which means that they exist outside of time, but there's a point that they emanate forth from, and that you can continually move towards them, and that they converge somewhere, but it's always beyond us. These have no forms. These are formless. So this is formed. We'll write this here on the side. Formed, and then this is formless. And what that basically means is there's actually no form to evil. Evil is just the absence of good. There's no form to lies. Lies is just the absence of truth. And there's no form to ugliness. Ugliness is just actually the absence of beauty. And so there's a couple ways to understand this and to prove that this actually makes sense. So imagine you have a car, and a car comes out of a factory and it's in mint condition, okay? You have this car and it's out of the factory. Yeah, look at that awesome drawing of a car. You could tell I'm an artist just by how easy that came out. Okay, so you have your car fresh out the factory, sparkling, brand new. This is what they call a car in mint condition. We can imagine this. Look, man, oh my God, they're such terrible sparkles. Okay, so this is your sparkling, brand new car. This just came out of the factory, brand new. Now, this car, this is the form of that car. That car is, there's only one way for that car to be in mint condition. Now, if you say, what's the opposite of the mint condition? There's no opposite to the mint condition of the car. There's just varying degrees of absence of mint condition. So maybe someone goes and gets some alterations and they start to change some things and they start to customize it. It's no longer the factory form of the car. Maybe the car, the wheels fall off. Maybe they wreck. Maybe the engine blows up. There's a million different ways it could start to move away from that pure form. But there's only one true pure form. Imagine the same thing with like a circle. So you have a circle. Oh, see, now this is a perfect example. You have the circle, but this is somewhat exhibiting absence of perfection of a circle. So this is kind of good, kind of true, and kind of beautiful, and it's pointing towards that, but it doesn't actually quite embody the circle. And so this is what the Plato called the realm of the forms, is that the form is kind of like an idea. and that this idea exists outside of time and space. It's general, it's universal. But then you have particulars which are localized. So like you could have a particular circle. So these forms can be manifested throughout time and space in various places. But there always is some sort of transcendent form of that exists outside of time and space that is eternal. Like a circle. And so this is about the idea of the form of something exists eternally. And you could never quite get there because it is just an idea. So in some ways you could measure it, but in other ways you can't. Like for example, you could measure the perfection of a circle and say, look, this is an objectively perfect circle. But it's kind of hard to say what is objectively true about it, or what is objectively beautiful about it, what is objectively good about it. You could just say it's mathematically correct, but they would identify that, okay, yes, there is a measurable aspect of it and an unmeasurable aspect of it, because it is transcendent, it's beyond. And so this is the realm of the forms. This is absolutely essential to the classical worldview, is that it is beyond you. There are parts that are measurable, there are parts that are not. There are parts that are universal, and there are parts that are personal. And you can look at the way that they built architecture back in history, especially whenever what did they pour their most resources into? And you look at things like, gigantic churches, okay? This is probably some of the greatest examples, okay? So you have these big churches. They were based off of mathematical proportions, things that were identifiable as transcendent forms that were geometrically solid. Things usually modeled after nature and pointing towards God. And so these churches, they had these scholars deeply study what are the forms of nature, and they identified patterns and ratios of ways to have their proportions, and then they studied the proportions of the human body, the way that the plants grow, and they used all of these mathematical sequences to design their music, to craft the liturgies, to craft the scriptures, to craft the architecture, basically the whole entire architecture of ancient worldview and ancient religions. And I'm not even talking about just Christianity, I'm talking about just all religions in general, that they all were based off of these abstract principles that were universal. But then they figured, okay, these are abstract universal principles, but how do we connect the person, the individual, to these abstractions? And this is enter into the story ornamentation. And so you have these big, grand, they basically would say like as big as possible, that was the scale. Beauty at scale was the goal, always pushing outward, always moving forward. So you have this gigantic building, but in essence it's just a shell. It's based off of these abstract mathematical sequences and all of these universal truths, but there's nothing personal about it. And so then you develop these ornamentations that go on it that speak to the people and that move them and connect them. It takes it from this cold, distant thing, and it gives it a sense of warmth and a sense of embrace and a sense of personality to it. And then this is where you have different styles, so you can see a church in England and a church in Germany and a church in Italy, and they all have different styles because it's the ornamentation. They're based off of universal principles, but the ornamentation gives it its personality, and that varies throughout culture. So there is an objectivity of the sequences and the patterns that which the building should be made in, and there's a subjectivity as to what actually pleases the people of this particular culture. It wasn't either or, it was transcendent. And so then even in Italy, for example, you would have, you have your Venetian style, and then you have your Florentine style, and you have your Roman style. So this all shows that it could be the subjectivity could be further subdivided all the way down to the individual level, and thus connect the person all the way back up to the abstract, to the universal, and the purpose of beauty was to connect you to God, nature, and to the ideal forms. It was something that would teach you something. It would help you move closer to the good, the true, and the beautiful, to the forms of this. It would get you away from a formless sense of reality, which they would say, when you're with the absence of these things, you're living in an evil, dishonest, ugly world. And that we actually can do our best, and this is part of our purpose, is to make a good, true, and beautiful world. Okay, so now that we've explained the basics of the classical, we get into the modern worldview. And so it's like, well, how did the modern worldview come about? And what exactly did they have a problem with the classical worldview? Because that seems so good, right? Well, they did identify some problems with the classical, and so the modern sought to fix that. So now we have the modern worldview. The modern view of beauty acknowledged the universality and it acknowledged the rationality, it acknowledged the principles, but it said there's excess ornamentation. It started with Renaissance humanism, but it ended with the Enlightenment and culminated with that. And it basically was a scientific worldview. What in the world? There we go again. Okay, it was a scientific worldview. It was measurable. And so they would say, look, we could measure these qualities, yes, but we can't measure God. So let's get rid of that. So they dispose of God. This is very important to understand the modern worldview. The modern worldview is a disposition of God. And because you can't measure God, everything else that you can't measure is stripped away. You get sayings like less is more. This is one of the mantras of modernity. Less is more. This gives rise to minimalism. Okay. They would say form follows function. This is another one. All right. This gives rise to utilitarianism. Okay, and basically what this means is we're going to strip away the unnecessary, we're going to strip away the unmeasurable. And so you get rise to these actually scientifically and universal, proven, beautiful structures. You would have a mug, for example, and it's like, let's remove all the ornamentation, let's figure out what you need for it to actually function as a mug. And they would reduce it down to the perfect simplistic form, and you get, you have the Bauhaus movement and stuff like that that really simplify fonts, they simplify architecture. You end up getting this new universal style of skyscrapers and of buildings where it's like you could just copy and paste these skyscrapers anywhere across any city, and it's not like one city has a particular style of skyscrapers because they're based off of these universal principles and these universal principles of design, which they were onto something there. That yes, there is universal principles of design, and sometimes the subjective gets in the way of that and it blinds you to the universal principles. And people sometimes they say that over ornamentation is getting stuffy. And so there's just too much superstition. It's a very globalist. So it's not just scientific, it's globalist. Whoops. And this is pushed by the globalists. It's a very globalist worldview. It's a universal, but without God. So you end up with minimalism, which I think actually minimalism, I love minimalism. But there are problems with that the postmodern people figured out. And we'll get to that here soon. But so the modern worldview, you have this very utilitarian, which basically the form follows function basically means, whatever the purpose of something is, that's all you need it to do. It's not supposed to move you. It's not supposed to delight you. It's not supposed to elicit some sort of emotional response. It's not supposed to elevate you towards some sort of ideal, because the ideal is abstract and can't be measured. All we care about is like something like the circle. We can measure that, so if it goes to that, it's good. But something like, moving you towards some other sort of concept that's beyond something like a circle or a triangle or a square or something like that, or the purpose of the coffee mug or the purpose of the skyscraper or the purpose of the car or the purpose of the house, you start to have more open concepts, but it starts to be removed from all the ornamentation. And then what happens is it starts to get cold and distant. So you have, imagine this big building, but with no ornamentation on it, no warmth. And so this is the end result of modernism, is cold and lifeless. And so you get all of these, basically in every aspect of design, you get objectively true, objectively good, and objectively beautiful things, but there's no more subjectively good, subjectively true, and subjectively beautiful things. They dispose with that altogether. And so you have really not just the death of God, but you also have the death of culture. And you have the death of not just the culture, but the death of the individual. And it just basically says you don't matter. We don't care about you, and you don't matter. You give rise to things like brutalism. And really the purpose becomes, the whole purpose of it ends up being, we don't care about your culture. We don't care about your individuality. Everything is meant to serve the new world order, the globalist purpose. And the whole thing really got psyop, and not psyop. The whole thing really got captured, and it turned into a psyop where it was meant to degrade and demean you, and they lost the purpose of finding the objective beauty. Objective beauty. They lost the purpose of that. And they lost the subjective too along the way. And so it just became this cold, lifeless, sterile. This is the rational age, where it's like everything has to be provable. If it's not provable, I don't care. And you can see how this is dangerous, because, what's the rational reason for taking care of a widow or an orphan? They can't really contribute much to the GDP, can they? So they're left on the wayside. And so this is, it's just on every aspect of life, from the large scale culture all the way down to the individual, it basically leaves people feeling isolated, more isolated than ever, but also less of an individual than ever. And so it really needs some sort of fix. They need to find some sort of way to fix this, and then you enter the postmodern worldview of beauty. Sure this is still rolling. Okay. Yeah, the postmodern worldview of beauty. And the postmodern worldview of beauty does the exact opposite of what the modern worldview of beauty is. It disposes with the objective, and it becomes entirely subjective. And it says, okay, if this is so objectively beautiful, why don't I feel anything when I look at it? This doesn't make any sense. You're telling me that this is beautiful, but I feel nothing. I've been disconnected entirely. We've stripped everything from its ornamentation. We've stripped all of the charm, all of the enchantment from life. And so I don't feel anything. And if I don't feel anything, therefore it's not beautiful. So I reject the objective, and all that there is the subjective. Everything is relative. And I have a brother who went to college, and when you go to college, you get brainwashed into believing this mantra. Everything is, I'll never forget, the first conversation I had with him after he came home from college, he said, I've learned something new, and it's so profound. I said, well, what is it, bro? What did you learn? And he said, everything is relative. So this is basically beauty based off of culture, beauty based off of context, oops, I had an N in there, context, and beauty based off of the individual, like your individual experience. I'm getting sloppy here. Individual. Okay, so everything is relative. Okay, so then everybody just starts picking and choosing. I like this ornamentation, I like that ornamentation, I like this ornamentation, that's beautiful to me. It's my own personal truth. It's a personal truth, not an objective truth. No transcendence. Everything is subjective. Everything is relative. And that person over there, they pick this ornamentation and that ornamentation and that ornamentation. And that's what's beautiful to them. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder became the mantra. Less is a bore was another one, which is just quite funny. Beauty, and this is why, what in the fuck? Okay. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. This is why I said at the very beginning, most of you fall into the postmodern category, because most people today will say beauty is subjective, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Because it is true. There is something very true about that. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but there's also something that is beyond the eye of the beholder. Something that causes you to look up to that which is away from you. And so instead of going back to the classical worldview, they rejected both previous worldviews. And now once again, you're left with another conundrum, another problem of nobody, that's the one thing we could all agree on, is nobody agrees what beauty actually is, because beauty is just what I say is beautiful to me, and what you say is beautiful to you, and that's the end of the story. And so these are the three basic worldviews of what beauty actually means. And you could decide for yourself, which one do you think actually makes more sense? Which one do you resonate with more? Do you want to stay in the postmodern worldview? Do you want to move into the modern worldview? Or do you want to go all the way back to the classical? Do you want to pick and choose which ones relate to you the most? But when you're talking to people and you hear them say something like this, they're being postmodern. And when you hear someone talk about universal principles of design, but they deny the transcendent, they deny the form of the good and the form of the truth and the form of the beautiful, and they deny God and nature and all of that, then they're not actually being a classical worldview, they're being a modernist. So this is really, the whole purpose of this is just to help you understand what beauty means, not according to any sort of one cohesive view, because there is no one view that everybody subscribes to. There's three. And these are the only three that you really need to understand. There is some anomalies, like Gothic architecture, where they're not really well documented, but that basically still falls into the category of classical worldview. And then you have, like metamodernism, which is still basically postmodernism as well. And so everything really falls under the umbrella of one of these three. So I hope this is helpful. I hope this helps you understand and gain more clarity about where your position is and the position of basically every other human on earth who's ever given a thought to beauty. And I think beauty is extremely important because I do hold a classical worldview. And I do think that beauty does move us closer to truth and to goodness. And that it does help us, teach us how to live a better life, and does increase our quality of life. But I'll let you decide for yourself if that's the worldview that you think is useful or not. But at least you understand where all of these people are coming from, and maybe it'll help you be able to communicate with the people who are actually open for a dialogue about beauty.